Today's guest, Dr. Richard Hossiep.
But if you have somebody who has achieved something in the last 10, 15, 20 years, then there's a different story here. They have more examples, but also because they can have more examples. I mean, if you have that thing, you have a job, you need 10 years of experience, and there's this job ad, I think last year, where they had 10 years experience with some programming language, and that was only invented 8 years ago, right? So that's kind of these things where you challenge what is happening.
Yeah. Yes, I also saw things like this happening. So that's sometimes funny then. But I think that's also the job of someone then to come up with the constraints and explain why this doesn't make any sense and prove them the other way, right? Because, yeah. Okay. And then a role simulation. So how does this work?
Yeah. Just a little bit of background on that. Usually, or for the last 20, 25 years, we thought that the broad consensus in science was that cognitive ability is by far the best predictor of job performance. That is still pretty much the case. But recent analysis have also shown that kind of role-based exercises, interviews, if they're done well, can also be very good predictors and better than thought previously. So that's actually of more relevance now than I would say maybe 10 years ago from a scientific point of view. And kind of role simulations that help. And obviously it's a simulation, right? It's in the name. So it's not real, but it's also very funny. I've conducted a couple of these executive assessments as well. And when you're in a role exercise, kind of in a role play, it might be an employee appraisal interview, or you simulate a talk to your like first days, or to your new team, or you're talking about maybe a case study, and that presentation of the results is also kind of a role play. And it's funny, after a while, people get into what they would usually do. You see that in the beginning, they have something prepared and then structured. And then after a while, they kind of behave how they would behave normally, or at least that's the perception. It is definitely a simulation, and it's never real, right? It's kind of an artificial setting. I mean, they know that they're in a selection or an assessment kind of setting. But after a while, you see that they behave differently because people are behavioral beings, right? We get into habits, and they kind of do what they would do usually. And that's kind of additional information that you wouldn't get just by asking people, because it's very differently to say, what is your approach to leadership? And then you say, well, my approach to leadership is whatever, a nice prepared answer, and then actually seeing how you do that, because one is just the question and the words, and the other one is the actual actions. So how do people behave, and not just talk about behavior, but show real behavior? And I think that's very informative. Albeit obviously it's kind of a little bit of an artificial setting. And then again, obviously you need to provide good feedback for that, right? And that's one of the things I think that is most neglected in the selection part, is you don't provide feedback. People are too much afraid of the legal implications of providing feedback. I think that's also one of the advantages of having a good job analysis, because if you have a good job analysis, and then you can provide feedback, and you can say, we have these 5 criteria. On 3 criteria, we saw that there's a gap between what we perceived your capabilities to be and what we need for the job. And that's something you can work with, right? Just saying, we have considered you, but another candidate got the job, maybe apply again in the future. That is not very useful. And personal experience of mine, when people apply at our company, I have now a pretty good rate of people thanking me for the email where I say to them, we can't consider you. And I think that's a pretty good sign when you explain things in a way that people actually get kind of useful feedback.
Richard and I talked about job design, job analysis, and also overall how to do assessments in a very sophisticated and scientific way, because usually it's more gut feeling or structure plus gut feeling. And he has developed a model and several models on how to define jobs, that you can derive certain interview tools and techniques from it, and also to do a simulation of jobs that is predicting the likelihood of success of a candidate succeeding in a role, plus also how to rate the results of an assessment, because that's also something not so easy. So for everybody who is evaluating jobs, candidates, and whatsoever, that's really the episode for you.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Hi, Richard. So I'm glad to see you. Katrin Sünderhauf recommended to speak to you, and now we are here. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about yourself and your journey, and also that we're talking a bit about assessments today. So we are curious.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Katrin, for the recommendation here, and I'm glad to be here. A little bit about myself. My name is Richard. I'm the managing director and co-founder of Applysia. We are a software company based on assessment and development centers, complex personal selection, complex personal development is kind of the sphere we're in, and we're supporting companies in getting that. I would like to say right, but at least better. I think that's the right aim here. Personal background: I completed a degree in business and completed degrees in psychology, both undergrad and postgraduate, and then I did my PhD on organizational trust at the University of Münster. And kind of in that time, we founded Applysia. I have also a bit of experience in conducting these kind of professional assessment centers, management audits, kind of management appraisals. There's different wordings around that. So mainly for executives in the last couple of years. And that was one of the driving factors also for focusing on that topic with Applysia. And now we are a team of 11 people, and we provide software for the HR selection as well as development.
That's, I think, a very interesting background for the topic you're nailing now. So can you tell me a bit more about what are the main attributes that are defining maybe assessments for you? So how do you look at it from your perspective? Because I think you have a very intense education, or also time spent around these pieces from different angles, which are quite scientific and sophisticated. So that's, I think, interesting in just considering regular maybe assessment processes of companies where they're just doing mostly based off gut feelings. How do you look at assessments overall from your perspective?
I'm not too much of a fan of the gut feeling in that process. I think that's one important aspect. If you have a bad gut feeling about somebody, that's not a good sign. I mean, I think you should nail it down to what it is, and I don't think that gut feeling should be neglected. But a proper assessment process at least consists of job analysis. So what do we actually need for that position? And then having relevant assessment tools. So that can be interviews, there can be tests, there can be questionnaires, there can be role simulations. So really depends on the context. And then kind of comparing the results of those assessments with the job analysis you did previously. That's theoretically, at least. In practice, very often, there's gut feeling, as you said, or semi-structured interviews at best, I would say, which is totally understandable from a resource point of view, because I mean it's just a lot of work to do it right, as most things. But there's really value in that, and I think I have the firm conviction that you need to focus on potential and kind of capabilities of people and kind of match that with the attributes of the job. Because if a person doesn't fit in a job, that doesn't mean that they are not a good employee or something, but they might just not fit that particular job. So you have to kind of also take that responsibility from an organizational perspective to focus then on how can we benefit the employee here, or the potential employee.
That's a good piece, because I think analyzing the job is the right thing to do in the beginning. And how I usually do it is you're looking first, not even at job description. It's more about if a person or several jobs would be filled, what would be the outcome the company would get from it? So thinking outcome driven first in an abstract way, maybe also in an idealistic way, and then deriving from that what activities are maybe needed to deliver that lead to a certain outcome. What's the time frame? How many people are needed to do that? And what are maybe the skill sets of the people, and maybe also the personality types of the people? And then you can break it down into functional, non-functional, and whatever. And what do you need to pay for it? And how long do you need to look for it, right? So how do you look at the job analysis piece?
Yeah, there are different techniques. I mean, it's pretty easy if you have or at least it's easier if you have somebody currently filling the role. So you can ask them, what do you actually do? What do you think is important? And kind of these kind of things. That might be a little bit biased because, I mean, you described yourself and people tend to attribute positive things to themselves. So it might be a little skewed towards the positive. But you can also ask other people who work with that person, with that role, and what they're doing and what they experience and what is important. But as you said, outcome driven is also, or at least take those outcomes into account, is very important because in the end, it's about what should be done and what should be delivered in that job. What are you actually doing? And then, as you said, you can differentiate between kind of the needed skill set in terms of technical skills. So, for example, language skills, or you need to have a driver's license. That's usually the basic example, right? And then you have kind of personality aspects and kind of what we call soft skills, right?
Cool. And who do you align this job analysis with? So is it that you just sit there as a recruiter or as an HR person, or who is doing that? And what are the stakeholders involved, and what are the roles of the stakeholders?
I think HR definitely should be involved, at least having the kind of the basic process lined out, how to get to that job analysis result. But definitely the function manager, the hiring manager, or whatever you want to call that person, that needs to be involved as well, because they have the technical expertise, what is needed, because HR is just a support function, right? And I think a very important support function, because they provide the expertise considering the HR part of it, like how can you assess certain skills and what might be a good wording for technical skills or something like that. But the kind of technical skills that you need in that job, may it be marketing, may it be IT, or may it be procurement or whatever, that needs to be informed by the hiring manager. And just let me say one thing about the recruiting in Germany. It's very interesting because we have the recruiting function, which is responsible for both the assessment as well as the kind of the attraction of talent. And that's one of the unique things we have in Germany, in the German-speaking market. In the UK and US, you usually have a differentiation between kind of attraction, talent acquisition, so to say, and then the actual selection process. So kind of the process whereby you kind of select between the people that you have attracted. And usually we combine that in Germany. I think that's very interesting. And I think that's not always beneficial, because then it's kind of muddy waters where you have those people you get in and you kind of have your 10 candidates you have provided, and then you want to work with those 10 or maybe get one of those 10. And it's kind of easier sometimes when you have a less investment in the candidates, but whether you kind of different functions, providing candidates, so to speak, providing always kind of the procurement word here, attracting talent, and then selecting the right talent for the right job.
I also think it's true what you say, and I'm a strong believer into that. And I think it also has another aspect, that you just cannot be outstanding at both, in my opinion, because it's a different skill set. And I think you also need to have different personality types usually for either the more assessment piece and also the attraction piece. And it's also another type of work with other skill
Yes,
sets
definitely.
and other
Definitely.
strengths that deliver or that leverage the function, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one is more like really marketing, employer branding, attracting people, getting people in, getting people excited about the job. And then the second part, the selection, is a little more analytical, a little more focused, a little less hyped, so to speak, and a little more focused on the concrete aspects of the job and the person.
And what functions do you regular look at when you do job analysis with your company, maybe? Or is your company also doing it?
Usually when people talk to us, they have done the job analysis. So they have the kind of the target profiles, and then the target profiles is what they work with in our software as well. So they kind of enter the target profiles and then assess people based on that. Job analysis is very tricky. There are a couple tools out there that may facilitate that, but then obviously it's also different from organization to organization, whether they have more kind of a soft skill focus or a technical focus. Sometimes they have job families where have competencies mapped out, but then those competencies don't really match what is actually done in the job. Sometimes you have a job description, and then if you give that job description to the person doing that job currently, they are totally blasted because they're just like, that's not what I do. I do something else, right? So that doesn't necessarily match up.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. What levels of jobs do you think, where is this getting more complex? Because what I see where the whole job analysis piece has the biggest impact is on executive search. And the more complex a job or a role gets, the more intense you need to look at and the more stakeholders you need to involve, but not in terms of just taking what they say, also looking for the constraints each individuals say, or when they talk individually to you and different things or different opinions come up, there are constraints and you are the only person that having the full overview. And then you need to be able to structure even a job into different scenarios or into different role types, and then aligning this piece. So that's tricky. Where do you see the biggest impact of a job analysis for which function and level of seniority or region or whatever attribute that comes to your mind?
I think as with the general aptitude diagnostics, that's what we do. It's based on the complexity of the job and kind of the impact the job has. If we talk about somebody who may be able to clean the streets here, like roughly, not very thoroughly, we don't need a big job analysis to do that. Most people would be able to do that. When we talk about doing that very fast and doing that efficiently with kind of machinery, as it is done these days, professionally, then that's a different story, right? So that's getting complex there. But usually we talk about kind of executives, however you want to define executives, leadership kind of levels, and then it's also getting a little blurry again because we have in the today's changing world, it's kind of tricky because you're doing a job analysis for a job that might look differently in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. So it's kind of hard to do the what do you need for that job when we don't know what that job will look like in a couple of years. That's kind of tricky because you need to be specific to have the criteria to assess people and kind of compare people to that job and compare that job to that strength of the individual person, but then also have that kind of outlook and be able to adapt to changing circumstances. And I think that's a real challenge in that. I think one possible solution might be to look also for broader capabilities in terms of adaptability, change, in terms of mental flexibility as well. How fast can people adapt to changing circumstances? And I don't want to, the proverb, the only constant is change, have that kind of capability to not only work with that, but maybe even thrive on that change.
And when you now have defined a job very clearly, how would that look like? Let's say for an executive that is managing revenue for the DACH region, for instance. Yeah, there it's a country manager or a regional manager, area vice president revenue for a B2B SaaS company that needs to sell into the DACH region and needs to hit 10 million ARR within 2 years, starting from scratch.
I think you can have very different approaches, right? So the question is, what is the person's job? And usually the higher up the hierarchy you go, the less technical expertise in terms of manual doing you need, right? Like they don't need to fill out accounts maybe. They might, but not necessarily. It's more about communication. It's more about having the broader overview, more a strategic approach to that. And usually that's when the more soft skills come into play, right? Because it's not about filing the term sheet right or something like that, but more about how to communicate, how to have a different planning view, how to have an approach for the market. And that's when more personality oriented things, soft skills come into play. And there are some instruments out there. Some personality inventories have kind of requirements profiles where you can send out links, and people then can say what that person might need to do, and that helps because usually in those job analysis you say we need a combination of a NATO soldier and a pastor, right? So it's kind of you need somebody who's super ambitious, super conscientious, super strategic and something, and never sleeps, right? But you need to have a kind of a realistic view on that as well. You need to say what is realistic. A person can't be the most conscientious person in the world and see like a minor detail in 10,000 numbers and then have the strategic view at the same time. That's very rare. I don't say that doesn't happen, but very rarely that happens.
And maybe
so you need to kind of align that.
And would not be available for you, right?
Probably. And that's also about the kind of what is really important and what's nice to have. And usually, when we talk to clients, it's sometimes very interesting. People say we have these 10 must-haves, and then you talk with them and then say, well, of those 10 must-haves, those 3 are not super necessary. And I mean, then it's not a must then, right? That's by definition. So what is really needed? What is kind of the necessary condition without these kind of capabilities and skills? They can't succeed in the job. And what is maybe an add-on? What is something you haven't thought about? And that's usually also kind of a nice approach to get into talking with people, because sometimes it's experience or whatever, and they say at least 10 years. I mean, usually it's 8 should be fine, right? There's very few jobs where 10 years is necessary and 8 years doesn't suffice. So it really depends, and then kind of challenging these criteria. Yes, right. Absolutely. And sometimes it might even be 3.5 if that has been like a crazy whatever, a roller coaster ride.
Exactly. It depends on the environment, right? How dynamic and how
Absolutely.
relevant. And also, this is also where I also like to look at stages. What is the environment they're coming from and what we need to build and so on. But let's go more into the interview tools, because this is now something what is making me curious. So what are the interview tools? Then when you have a job like this, we can stay with the area vice president sales example if we need an example.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have different interview tools. There are different things out there. You can just do the very basic, I would say, ATS interview, and then you have a couple of criteria, and then you talk to people, or in that context of that job, usually you would just, I think the real world example is you just sit in the room or sit in the Microsoft Teams room, and then you just talk to each other roughly about experience, about things. And the problem with that, or the potential problem with that, is that, there's kind of bias. I don't want to go into too much detail, but if you like that person, it's way more likely that you're going to recommend them, no matter how well they fit the job, right? Just because of likability. And there's the similar to me effect, right? If somebody looks like you, speaks like you tend to like them. It's just because you're used to that, right? You're used to yourself. So kind of like that's what people go for. And obviously in a still male dominated workplace, that has impact for female applicants for jobs. So that's just a very basic thing. I don't want to go into too much detail about that. So it's important to have kind of a structured approach to that. So what are you really talking about? Also making sure that you just stick to fairness. I mean, if you talk 10 minutes to one candidate and an hour to another candidate, it's way more likely that either the 10 minutes went super great and you definitely want to hire them, or you didn't give them enough opportunity to talk about, well, themselves and how they might fit the job. So it is either super good or super bad, but definitely not comparable. So you need to have a little bit of structure at least. And I'm not saying that you need to time every question 60 seconds and then you cut them, but you need to have some comparability in that. And then again, if you're talking about top management, that's also a different kind of approach. If you're having top managers, then kind of combining structured and semi-structured or little unstructured approaches would also be beneficial, in my opinion.
Yes, and I think there it's also coming more about, let's talk about what was achieved in the past and how, right? Instead of
definitely,
how would you do this and that? And
yes, so definitely,
it's getting way more practical.
Absolutely, and I mean, you can ask based on experience, and you can ask on like kind of potential things. So you have kind of both options, which is very well researched, as well as solid, as good examples. And if you're having somebody at the beginning of their career, obviously they don't have such a long track record to talk about. So you need to talk more about hypotheticals. But if you have somebody who has achieved something in the last 10, 15, 20 years, then there's a different story here. They have more examples, but also because they can have more examples. I mean, if you have that thing, you have a job, you need 10 years of experience, and there's this job ad, I think last year, where they had 10 years experience with some programming language, and that was only invented 8 years ago, right? So that's kind of these things where you challenge what is happening.
Yeah. Yes, I also saw things like this happening. So that's sometimes funny then. But I think that's also the job of someone then to come up with the constraints and explain why this doesn't make any sense and prove them the other way, right? Because, yeah. Okay. And then a role simulation. So how does this work?
Yeah. Just a little bit of background on that. Usually, or for the last 20, 25 years, we thought that the broad consensus in science was that cognitive ability is by far the best predictor of job performance. And that is still pretty much the case. But recent analysis have also shown that kind of role-based exercises, interviews, if they're done well, can also be very good predictors and better than thought previously. So that's actually of more relevance now than I would say maybe 10 years ago from a scientific point of view. And kind of role simulations that help. And obviously it's a simulation, right? It's in the name. So it's not real, but it's also very funny. I've conducted a couple of these executive assessments as well. And when you're in a role exercise, kind of in a role play, it might be an employee appraisal interview, or you simulate a talk to your like first days, or to your new team, or you're talking about maybe a case study, and that presentation of the results is also kind of a role play. And it's funny, after a while, people get into what they would usually do. You see that in the beginning, they have something prepared and then structured. And then after a while, they kind of behave how they would behave normally, or at least that's the perception. It is definitely a simulation, and it's never real, right? It's kind of an artificial setting. I mean, they know that they're in a selection or an assessment kind of setting, but after a while, you see that they behave differently because people are behavioral beings, right? We get into habits, and they kind of do what they would do usually. And that's kind of additional information that you wouldn't get just by asking people, because it's very differently to say, what is your approach to leadership? And then you say, well, my approach to leadership is whatever, a nice prepared answer, and then actually seeing how you do that, because one is just the question and the words, and the other one is the actual actions. So how do people behave, and not just talk about behavior, but show real behavior? And I think that's very informative. Albeit obviously it's kind of a little bit of an artificial setting. And then again, obviously you need to provide good feedback for that, right? And that's one of the things I think that is most neglected in the selection part, is you don't provide feedback. People are too much afraid of the legal implications of providing feedback. And I think that's also one of the advantages of having a good job analysis, because if you have a good job analysis, and then you can provide feedback, and you can say, we have these 5 criteria. On 3 criteria, we saw that there's a gap between what we perceived your capabilities to be and what we need for the job. And that's something you can work with, right? Just saying, we have considered you, but another candidate got the job, maybe apply again in the future. That is not very useful. And personal experience of mine, when people apply at our company, I have now a pretty good rate of people thanking me for the email where I say to them, we can't consider you. And I think that's a pretty good sign when you explain things in a way that people actually get kind of useful feedback. And I think that all organizations should do that more. And I think if you're having a good selection process, you're way more, or it's way easier for you to do that because you have the actual information you need. And that is, I mean, you can't really argue with that if you're having the criteria, right? It's not like we didn't like you. It's about defined criteria.
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Then when you have results, how do you rate them correctly without a bias again, or also that you judge it in the right maybe context or way? Because sometimes maybe if an interviewer is not trained well enough and they need to assess a certain situation, which they are maybe not even capable of, but they're just in the seat. How do you make sure to anticipate that problem?
Yeah, where do we start with that? That's a big question. Yeah, there are these kind of they're called frame of reference trainings. So where you actually talk with people and show them what's kind of an example that would fit into a category and what is an example that wouldn't fit into a category, and then you need to do your job right, not in the interview, but before, because you need to have criteria that should be informative enough to be also distinguishable, because sometimes you have very broad competencies, like strategic competence and market overview. I mean, that's super broad. That probably means something for you and something for me, but that might not be the same, right? So that's pretty broad. So you need to be specific. In aptitude diagnostics, usually you do that by behavioral anchors. So you say a possible behavior by which you could judge whether that person would exhibit that behavior. Very technical explanation. So whether they do that or not, and then you have an example. And then you have maybe a second example. And then you need to make sure whether people need to show exactly that behavior or whether that's just one behavior they could show. So you need to make sure that there's kind of an alignment between what people understand by that frame of reference training. And you need some time to spend that. But again, HR is not something you can just, everybody does, because all people deal with people. If you're building a bridge, you wouldn't say I was quite good at math, so that shouldn't be too hard for me to construct a bridge, right? Because the statistics, that's not that hard. I would trust a professional with that. And again, doing these kind of interviews, it matters whether you know of these kind of things and whether you're aware of what kind of behaviors and what kind of tasks need to be done to ensure a fair and a good process. And there are people who do that. I mean, if you focus on that in the job, in the studies, there are more business psychology people who really focus on that assessment as part of their education already, and then in their professional experience, obviously. But definitely, usually you hear that in the HR. Well, I've dealt with people for 20 odd years. I know how to conduct an interview. Turns out, doesn't necessarily mean that you know that.
I definitely agree. And what can be Applysia used for in that whole process? So you also just talked about your beliefs and how you look at things, and I think it's very, as we discussed already in the beginning, scientific. So I like it. And what can your software do with that?
So we really focus on kind of we started with a problem solving approach. So what's out there and how can we improve it? And we have quite a lot of evidence in science how things should be done roughly. But there's a big gap between science and practice in that. So we kind of try to bridge that, and we have bridged that a couple thousand times with the candidates that have been assessed with our software. So we kind of provide a framework for that. So you enter your criteria, you enter your kind of behavioral anchors, and then we guide through the process. For example, everybody rates the candidate based on their ratings, and they don't see the ratings of the others. You probably know the situation where you talk with the candidate, and then the candidate goes out of the door or leaves the room, leaves the virtual room, and somebody says, "Oh, that was not good." Right? And that's a huge bias. I mean, how can you say, well, I liked him, I liked her, based if somebody else, at best, that's your superior, right? So the boss says, I liked him or I didn't like him. How can you disagree with them? And what we do with our software, we kind of split that up. So you have your own rating process. So everybody rates by themselves, and then you compare that. So you take out the kind of the hierarchy bias, so to speak. And then you also get away from that observer shift. If somebody says that's good or that's great, you tend to say that's great as well, right? Because we tend to agree with people. People agree with people. That's how we work as humans. So we kind of provide a framework for that to get the rating biases out of that. And because you need to set up the criteria in the beginning, you also I don't want to say forced, but maybe nudged to think about these criteria, right? Because you have to enter these criteria, so you need to think about them. And then in the end, we also automate the reporting process, so you get the results that you gain through that process as a document, and then in your preferred form. So you also are able to provide feedback, or you at least enabled to provide feedback depending on the process. That sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't happen so much. That depends on how you want to use that process.
And what companies are using your software for solving which problems, or for what situations?
Mm-hmm. So that we have both kind of HR consulting companies that use our software for their clients, then conducting both selection as well as development centers, so kind of assessment centers. That's usually the name for selection processes. And then also development centers where you have internal employees and you kind of want to have a view on their strength and potential and how they might develop. And I'm a big fan myself of combining those two. So if you're having somebody in selection, that's a great start point for development purposes. Again, if before you develop people, you should make kind of an assessment where they are, right? It doesn't make any sense to give you Chinese lessons when you already know Chinese, right? So that doesn't make sense, but you need to find that out. And in terms of Chinese, everybody says, well, sure. But in terms of leadership, nobody does that. It's just like, yeah, there's a leadership course. But maybe you don't need that. Maybe you need something else. Maybe you would profit more from a communication skills course or whatever. I'm aware that those two might overlap. So we have those consulting companies, and we also have organizations like the VV insurance that conduct them internally. So they have selection as well as assessment centers and conduct them internally. And we have organizations that use our software for kind of structured interviews. So they do that in selection. They have structured interviews. We have a cooperation with one university, and we provide them with scientific evidence-based kind of interview guidelines, and also with questions that they might ask in the interview process, and how better or how suitable answers might look like. So also kind of the rating scales there, and then they use that for their assessment. That's one organization who's working in the healthcare sector, so they use that for healthcare professionals to assess those, but usually more in kind of the management and upper management scenarios, both in the group context. So, the classical trainee assessment center, after you graduated, you go into a big company and then you do those kind of things. Also development context, and also a lot of single assessments, management audits, so higher up executives, both for selection as well as assessment centers.
Cool. And who is a guest that I don't know, but you know who I should interview next, as Katrin recommended you?
That's a very good question. I wasn't prepared for that. I should have been. Who should I recommend? There's a lot of people to recommend. I have to think about that. I have a lot of people in mind, and I have to think about that. There's a great the Forum Assessment, which is Katrin also a member of, a former executive. So there's lots of people from that sphere that I think would make a great guest for this a scenario here.
Cool. Then Richard, thank you so much. It was really insightful. I like the clarity of thinking and explaining, and it was great having you.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here.